Hi everyone, Gundam Facts here for a 16th and brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today, we're going to the 1-year war era in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video, we are going to explore all the variants of the Magellan-class battleship, how much they differ from the regular model, when did they appear, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Magellan-class? A mass production space battleship developed by the Earth Federation forces, the Magellan was an entire line of ships serving as the vanguard of the Federation during the 1-year war. Introduced in UC-71 by Vic Wellington, a relatively new ship manufacturer, the Magellan appeared alongside the Salamis and Columbus classes, but remained the most impressive ship of the lot. Impressive first because of its size, with a length reaching 327 meters and a width of 94.5 meters, which contributed in making the Magellan a far more impressive design than the smaller Salamis class. However, the size wasn't the only thing making the Magellan impressive. The class installed on board top-notch electronic warfare devices, which gave the Magellan extremely high-performing long-range active and passive sensors, coupled with very accurate water-guided targeting system for its arsenal, which made it a standout in comparison with the few other battleships existing at that time. Yet, size and sensors weren't really the greatest pride of the class. As one of the ships developed following the Big Gun Doctrine, the Magellan had been designed to boost a terrifying arsenal, meant to achieve complete dominance in space through unforgiving and overwhelming firepower. This arsenal included notably 7 twin-barrels cannons, with 2 of them being placed on the bow, 3 in the middle section, and 2 covering the rear of the ship. In the initial production run, these cannons were shell-based railguns, but by mid-UC-76, they were slowly phased out and replaced by more precise and destructive twin-beam cannons. Aside these main cannons, which offered powerful offensive capabilities, the Magellan could count on a solid defense provided by 14 double-barreled anti-air turrets, which protected the vital section of the ship. In addition to these weapons, the Magellan also mounted inbuilt missiles launcher, similar to the one used in the Salamis class. Missiles which could be water-guided or be fired manually for suppressive fire. Like the Salamis, the Magellan also incorporated sub-bridges to its design, and if the main bridge was to be shut down, controls over the Magellan could, theoretically, be transferred to the sub-bridges and enable the battleship to continue combat with a minimum loss of performance. The result was a nimble and effective ship, remarkable not only because of its firepower, but because of its excellent speed and communication capabilities. And soon, the Magellan became a favorite in the top brass, becoming the commander-use battleship for the Earth Federation Space Forces fleets. When the 1-year war finally started in UC-79, the Magellan had everything to shine on the battlefield. The first counterpart to the Magellan, the Chive-class, was outmatched in every field by the Federal cruiser, while the second counterpart, the Guazin, could crush a Magellan with not much difficulties, but it was an extremely costly cruiser which only underwent a 10 units production, not enough to compete with the few hundreds Magellans the Federation fielded at the start of the war. Yet, a dark fate awaited the Magellan. First, the newly introduced use of Minovsky interference grounded the tactical advantage of the Magellan by rendering all its sensors and war-guided missiles dull weight, and if that wasn't enough, the sub-bridges system proved faulty and unable to perform as expected. Ice on the cake, the appearance of the new wonder weapon, the mobile suit, proved to be a nightmare for the Magellan, which ranks were decimated by such small and nimble weapons, notably during the fateful Battle of Loom. During said battle, the Magellan nonetheless fared better than the Salamis-class, notably because of its anti-air defenses, but it still suffered heavy casualties. Despite this, the Magellan remained in service, and when the front line shifted back in space in November UC-79, the unlucky ship took back its mantle of fleet commander ship for the Federation forces. Yet, the Federation engineers were not idiots, and to make the Magellan more relevant and capable of cooperating with the new mobile suits of the Earth Federation Space Forces, the useless advanced sensors were removed, saving internal space and enabling the belly of the Magellan to serve as a makeshift hangar, capable of transporting up to 4 mobile suits. In addition, the Magellan started being used as a makeshift carrier, with multiple GEMs and ball units being transported on its external hull. This bold move, dangerous and unsafe for maintenance, nonetheless greatly helped the Federation to transport its mobile suit during the final stages of the war, when ships with internal mobile suit storage were not yet mass-produced. Until the very end of Operation Star One, the Magellan would prove to be a stubborn class, scoring as many successes as it scored defeats, but always fighting to the bitter end despite being a design not adapted to the modern ways of space warfare. After Abawaku, the Magellan ranks were decimated, and it was believed that no more than 7 Magellans had survived the battle intact. The Magellan continued its legacy through its numerous variants, proving sometimes an appropriate design, but most of the time proving through their failure that the days of the big gun doctrine were finally over. Yet, the legacy of the Magellan would be a golden one, since its basic design would be restudied by Vic Wellington, who later continued the Magellan lineage with new effective and versatile ships, such as the Dogosegir and much later the Magellan-class. Now, a question you probably always ask yourself: what's going on with the Magellan paint scheme? Is it green or is it blue? Well, the answer is both. As seen with the Magellan-class Magellan, seen in Mobile Suit Gundam, named ship of the class, so the first Magellan in service, the first batch of Magellan initially started with a green paint scheme, something supported by the early Magellans such as the Ananke, revealed flagship during Loom, which are all conveniently green colored. Such Magellans would be decimated during the Battle of Loom, and the few green surviving Magellans retreated to Luna 2, later being seen in Mobile Suit Igloo accompanying the Luna 2 signature gems, the Gem Kais. After Loom, the Earth Federation Space Forces restarted producing more Magellans, and these brand new batches of ships would instead be painted in blue colors. And before you ask, Mobile Suit Gundam and Gear and Greed both features blue and green Magellans, so we know the color is more than artistic choice. Now that's enough setting for today, let's get to our ships. Let's start our variant list with a refitted version of the Magellan, a rare breed called the Trafalgar-class. Before the start of the 1-year war, the Earth Federation Space Forces had planned to use their brand new Columbus-class supply carriers to transport their squadrons of fighters, but unfortunately, a problem had quickly emerged. The Columbus lacked any weapons, and thus it was forced to rely on Salamis and Magellan escorts to be protected. This was rather annoying, as it forced the fleet to hold in reserve some ships to protect the Columbus instead of having them roam the front line, as they were intended to. In response to this issue, the Earth Federation field engineers came out with a new design, which would have made the Earth Federation Space Forces fleets less reliant on the Columbus. The idea was that if Magellans were needed to protect Columbus, which themselves transported and launched the fighters, then the mothership role should basically go to the Magellan. Following this doctrine, they started refitting some Magellans with additional parts, giving birth to the Trafalgar-class. The refitment used in the Trafalgar is not very complex. The main modification was the addition of a new bow and two long launching hangars, which essentially turned the Magellan-class battleship into an open-deck type support cruiser. These hangars enabled the Trafalgar to launch as many as 12 fighters, usually public or cyberfish units, and serve as their mothership. Because of the addition of these hangars, the Trafalgar lost much of the Magellan firepower, with only one out of the 7 twin-barreled cannons being kept in the design, and all the original anti-air turrets being removed as well. To make up with that, 8 anti-air twin machine guns were mounted, and the Trafalgar was also outfitted with 2 6-tube external missiles launchers mounted in the extension of the bow, and also 4 large missile launch tubes, a type of missile launchers that would later be used in the Pegasus class. The result was a decent ship, capable of good fire support, while being a somehow limited mothership for space fighters. Now, despite all these assets, the Trafalgar suffered from the fact of being a refitted battleship, and because of that, it couldn't be more than a support cruiser and not a carrier. This led to only 8 Magellans being converted into Trafalgars, and the end of the refitment plan even before the start of the 1-year war. Nonetheless, the Trafalgar gave basis to the Federation for their future naval strategies, and the ship would be heavily referenciated during the Pegasus-class early development. Out of the 8 ships, most suffered casualties during the 1-year war, but 2 of them managed to bring pride to the class. The first one, the Triumph, would have the honor of serving as the mothership of Tenet A. Young, the Federation No. 1 ace, nicknamed the Shark. The second one, the Plunder, would become a ghost vessel after bringing civilians aboard following a Zion gas attack in their Side 4 colony. Because the Federation top brass feared the gas to be a bioweapon, the Plunder was quarantined indefinitely, which resulted in the ship having nowhere to dock and the civilians merging with the military crew, forming the pirate group named Shutendoji, seen in Blazing Shadow. Later, Shutendoji would reform as the PMC Maria Shield, with the Plunder, last of the Trafalgars, serving as the group mothership. Time for a ship you definitely never heard about. A ship I definitely never heard about before. I'm calling out the Magellan Type K, aka the Magellan Late Production Type. A ship featured exclusively in the Gear and Grid games, the Late Production Type is a ship which we know almost nothing about, but here what we can find about it. In the waning days of the 1-year war, the Earth Federation Space Forces had started extensively using the Magellans as makeshift mobile suit carriers. But while a Magellan could transport an entire gym battalion, the quality of such transport left much to be desired, as only 4 of these gyms could be kept internally, and in such tight compartments that they couldn't be properly maintained. To solve this delicate issue, shared with the Sentinel class, the Federation engineers planned to have both types of ships refitted with a rear hangar, to enable them to have proper storage for mobile suits. This idea led to a similar refitment program for both ships and the creation of respectively the Salamis Type K, aka Fuji class, and the Magellan Type K, aka Late Production Type. In the Magellan case, the Late Production Type received a rear hangar of the same type of the Fuji, and this hangar enabled the Magellan to now transport internally up to 4 additional mobile suits in the new hangar. This addition enabled the Magellan to crew not 4 but 8 gyms internally, and the rear hangar made maintenance possible for the mobile suit installed there, making the Magellan closer to a proper carrier than what it was previously. However, this great addition came with 2 drawbacks. The first one was that to mount the additional part needed for the rear hangar, the 2 rear beam cannons were sacrificed, which reduced the rear defenses of the late production type. Nonetheless, the late production Magellan still retained 5 out of the 7 original turrets, so it wasn't a drastic loss of firepower like the one seen in the Trafalgar. The second drawback induced was that the propulsion system wasn't upgraded, and because the rear hangar increased the weight of the battleship, this resulted in increased fuel consumption and decreased cruising range. These problems rendered the refitment less effective, and because of that, only a handful of Magellans upgraded into late production types in order to participate Operation Star 1. In the end, nothing else is known about said class, but in Gear and Grid, the class becomes available only in the late game, confirming once and for all the late production type didn't appear before November and December UC-79. Let's move to a more consistent variant, a Magellan type introduced in the OVA Stardust Memory, the Magellan Kai, also referred as the Magellan UC-83 refit. At the end of the 1-year war, the Federation fleet laid in ruin after the Battle of Abawaku, and the Magellan-class was not really making exception, with almost all its effectives having been destroyed or being badly damaged. As early as late UC-80, the Federation sought to rebuild its depleted forces and reconstitute its fleet with more advanced cruisers, notably for a planned show of strength, the UC-83 Naval Review. The Federation engineers first started refitting the Salamis class, and eventually came up with a design emphasizing firepower, the Salamis UC-83 refit, which essentially was the Salamis turned into a mini-scale Magellan. Soon, the popular Magellan itself became drafted into the refitment plan, which led to the refitment of a certain number of them, especially the most damaged ones, into the variant known as the UC-83 refit. Now, from the start, there was a problem with this refit. During the 1-year war, the Magellan had proved to be an inadequate design, but the Federation forces were not ready to give up on overwhelming firepower and the big gun doctrine. For their engineers, yes, mobile suits were meant to stay, but overwhelming firepower would remain relevant, and instead of producing more mobile suit carriers, all that was required was to improve the Magellan with better anti-mobile suit defenses, and then everything would be fine. In accordance with this mindset, the Magellan UC-83 refit kept most of the Magellan original design, keeping the sub-bridges, the 7 twin-barreled beam cannons, and the 14 anti-air turrets, but didn't even bother to introduce a proper hangar for mobile suit, which was absurd considering the new rules of space warfare. Instead, the UC-83 refit replaced all the shell-based anti-air turrets with laser gun turrets, which were weapons with a slower cadence of fire but higher effectiveness against mobile suit armor. This meant that while mobile suit could survive 2 or 3 shots of the old shell-based turrets, the laser turrets would be much more deadly and could shoot down a mobile suit with a single direct hit. Aside this, the UC-83 refit Magellan removed the heavy missiles launchers installed on the sub-bridges and instead added 2 of these additional laser turrets in order to improve the defenses of the secondary bridges. On paper, this seemed a good compromise, but in reality, it it sucked. A lower rate of fire from the anterior turrets would prove a drawback because of the speed and agility of mobile suits, and greatly reduce the chances of direct hit. Of course, if it happened, jackpot. But if not, well, mobile suit would just dance around. During the UC-83 naval review, the Federation proudly displayed its new batches of Magellan refits, only to have them vaporized by the tactical nuke of the GP-02. Later on during the Dallas conflict, the Magellan Kai UC-83 refit attempted to shine again, but proved utterly ineffective against the Zeon Remnant mobile suits and mobile armor, and worse, incapable of helping in any forms the Federation squads of Jim Kais, the only weapons who could remotely have their chances. Following this disastrous performance, the plan for this refit was simply abandoned, and the remaining surviving ships were quickly decommissioned, phased out in favor of the Salami Sky and later Alexandria. Yet that wouldn't be the last time we would see a Magellan UC-83 refit, something I will explain later on during the video. You never ask yourself if the Federation was able to turn the shitty Salamis into an effective light carrier, the Salami Sky, what in the world stops them from doing the same thing with the Magellan? Well boys, they actually did, as shown with their variant from the Sentinel novel, the Magellan Kai Sentinel version. At the end of the 1 Year War, most of the surviving Magellans and Magellan wreckages had been converted into UC-83 refit, but some of them did not and were instead put to storage. After the events of Stardust Memory, both the Salamis and Magellan UC-83 refit were phased out, and the Federation started modifying vintage Salamis into a new class known as the Salami Sky, which modified the nose of the original Salamis with a new bow, with an inbuilt hanger and mobile suit catapult. This popular and effective modification became widespread, and the Federation engineers ended up applying it to the old vintage Magellans remaining, turning them into the Sentinel version. With a Salami Sky type bow, the Magellan Kai removed two of the original megaparticle cannons, but instead it gained a large mobile suit hanger, which enabled it to transport safely and surely up to 12 mobile suits. This made the Magellan finally up to date with its era standards, as it combined heavy firepower with better than average mobile suit carrying capacities, making it a fearsome cruiser. Aside this change, nothing else was modified, but this refitment proved to be pure wonder, especially because refitting Magellans into Sentinel Kais was much cheaper than refitting them into UC-83 refits, and this contributed in solidifying its position as a reliable cruiser for the Federation forces. Yet, despite all these good things, the Sentinel Kai never became too much widespread, and for a wide variety of reasons. First, only few Magellans had survived the 1 Year War, and even less had escaped the UC-83 refit, which made the Sentinel Kai not a rare breed, but nonetheless an uncommon vessel. Secondly, the Sentinel, despite all its assets, remained a refitted battleship, so it couldn't compete in terms of cruising range with autonomous carriers like the Irish, Argama and Alexandria classes, nor in terms of speed with light cruisers such as the Salami Sky. This resulted in the Sentinel Kai remaining unfavored and never becoming a mainstay vessel in the Federation forces. In March UC-88, the Eno fleet sent to support the Task Force Alpha against the new Decides brought along some Magellan Kais, among which was the flagship Bull Run. These ships would defect to the new Decides and even serve as motherships for the organization Xeku 1 and 2. Nonetheless, the Magellan Kai-class as a whole didn't lose its honor, as other ships of such class later successfully reinforced Task Force Alpha for all-range assault against Ayers City. And to end this video, let's dig a Magellan variant seen in Victory Gundam, a mysterious ship which appeared in the later portion of the series. In episode 41, the Reinforced Jr. finally catch up with the rest of the Earth Federation Space Forces fleet, stationed at the satellite island. This fleet is composed of Salami Skies and Club Refits and one Rakailung flagship, the Jeanne d'Arc. Yet, if you stop at 18.13 minutes, we can see a strange grey battleship hanging out around the Clubs and Salamis. The ship is clearly longer than any Salami Sky or Clubs, and the presence of the full rear engines and sub-bridges fins doesn't leave any doubts. This is not a miscolored Rakailum as I once theorized, but a Magellan type. Now, which Magellan variant would it be? A Sentinel or a UC-83 Kai? First, it's important to mention that in theory, both could work. Victory aired in 1993, while Sentinel is from 87 and Stardust Memory from 92. So both Magellan variants were already a sync where Victory was released. Now, if you go on the Gundam Wiki, you will find this picture in the Magellan UC-83 refit section, and yes, I know it, it's me who uploaded it. Then, is it a UC-83 refit? Well, no, but actually, yes. If we look closely at this mysterious figure and increase the lighting, we can distinguish a sort of open deck, much like the Alexandria or the Club class. If this was a Sentinel Magellan, they wouldn't need to modify it this way, since we see that in Victory, Vanilla Salami Sky keeps their closed bow hanger, and Ice on the Cake, we can distinguish one turret under the bow, but the Sentinel Magellan had to remove for the hanger. Now, Victory introduces us to a particular ship, which is the key to find out what this Magellan is. The Gauntlet, which is presented as an old Alexandria refitted with parts from the Reinforced class. With this knowledge, the most plausible theory is that this ship is an old Magellan Kai UC-83 refit, brought back into service, later remodified with reinforced parts and receiving a hangar and an external launching ramp. Considering the rest of the general refitment featured by the rest of the fleet, chances are high that this Magellan received a beam shield and also a Minovsky craft. And then, after this scene, this ship never reappears in the whole series, because they kind of forgot they placed that Easter egg there. In the end, this Magellan is the proof the Magellan design was not that bad, and perhaps one of the most stubborn in the entire Universal century. And we have now completed today's topic, and I hope you all like it. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button, and most importantly, comment and subscribe, as it will really help the channel to flourish. So long, fellow new types, until the time of our next special edition.